Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to my shop. Today we are making a bevel gauge. Ooh, I've actually never made one of these before. Let's dive in and have some fun. So we have the beam and all the brass hardware to make a bevel gauge. Let's have a little bit of fun here. For the main body of this one, I'm going to use some walnut. And I had this chunk left over that would work out really, really well. Give it a quarter sawn section, or close to quarter sawn. So I'm going to start by planing one side flat, using that as a reference, and then squaring up another side to it. And that way I have my reference face and reference edge. Now I need to figure out how wide is this thing going to be. And thankfully I've got these little brass pieces that come with it. And so I need it to be about the same width of these. I mean, I can always file these down to the shape, as we'll be doing later. But I need to figure out then how thick does it also need to be. So I'm going to put these together and space them out and then measure the thickness and the width that I want on the beam. And then I can mark that out on this block of wood. And so with a marking gauge, we can mark out both the thickness and the width. And then for length, I'm just going to set the blocks on there, set the beam on there, and see, it's going to be about this long. There's nothing specific about the length. It just has to be about the right length. And then we can start ripping this thing down. So we're going to rip it down to the width of it first, or excuse me, the thickness of it first. And then we can cut it to the length. And then we can rip it one more time into the thickness or the width, whichever one we didn't do. But before we get onto that, I'm going to smooth it down. This will allow me to get a nice clean mark on the other direction of it. And so for the thickness, I want it to be the same width or the same thickness, whichever one of those two you want to choose, as the beam. So we can put a mark on there and then slice it down, keep it a little ways away from that line, and then we can plane it right back to that marking gauge line on there. So now we want to inset these brass pieces onto either end. And so I'm marking off how far they need to come in. Everything on this is much bigger than it needs to be, and that's perfectly fine. I can set a marking gauge to the thickness of the brass and then mark in so that this will inset a little bit. And I want it to be sticking out a little bit proud because I'm going to be filing off the brass to match the wood. And so just like cutting in a tiny little rabbit, we're going to use the dovetail saw and cut in a tiny little rabbit. March down the sides, right on the lines, and then chop in to cut out the shoulder of this. Or I guess it could be the cheek, depending upon which way you hold the board. The nice thing with a dovetail saw is you can cut cross grain just as well as you can cut rip grain, because it's a pretty straightforward surface. A lot of people actually like to have a hybrid cut on their dovetail saw to make the two a little easier. We can file it out, make sure it's nice and smooth. We want to have a little bit of roughness in there for the epoxy to hold on to, but just enough so that it works out well. We're going to be mixing up a little bit of epoxy, spread it on the surface, put more than you want. We want to squeeze out all of the edges so that when it squeezes out, we can plane it all back nice and flush and we get a good fit on there. And then to hold these in place, we're going to use some hand screw clamps. And yeah, this gets actually kind of sloppy. How do you hold them in there and then knock them back and forth? And you want to tap it around until it gets all in place. And then you get one end just in place. And then the other end, you have to get it in place. And then you end up knocking out the first end and you end up going back and forth a few times. But it's a nice thing with epoxy. You have some open time. I was using, I think it was 30-minute epoxy on these. After you give it time to cure, you can come back and start filing it off. And on this one, I made it just a little bit wider. The brass pieces are a little larger than they need to be, and so I can file those back to the wood, and then I can get a nice clean surface on here. I wanted my beam to be the same width as the actual beam. I wanted the whole body to be the same width as the beam, or the beam to be the same width as the body. Either way you want to look at it. So the brasses are a good bit larger than they need to be. Shape them back to match the wood, and then smooth them out and file them off. I had a little bit of epoxy come through, and so just a light little tap worked that off of there. On the rounded end, I'm going to work the wood down with a rasp and get it close to the brass pieces, and then I'm going to come in with a file, and that will allow me to then do both at the same time. I don't like to use my nice wooden rasps on metal, but using a metal rasp on wood actually works perfectly fine. So on these finished surfaces, I want to actually shine them up and make them pretty. So I'm going to be using a heavy file to come in and take them down to the same thickness of the wood. And then I'm going to come in with a very, very clean file and give them all the same direction scratches. But before I do the final details on that, we still have some more work to do on the main body. I'm going to use this pencil on a couple thicknesses of actually 55 irons, and so that will lift it up to the right point. I'll mark one side of the cut and then flip the block over and mark the other side of the cut. Now I need to find the saw that has the right fit for it, and I want it to be something that slides in nicely but doesn't slide in too easily. And so I have different saws with different sets in them, and so I'm trying to find one where it slides in relatively well, but it's not perfectly tight. And so I found one that was really, really close to what I wanted. It was a tiny bit tighter, but I was able to come in with some sandpaper and just widen it out just a hair. After that, now we can cut this down. So we have those lines, and I'm going to be very, very careful to get myself a nice straight cut down. And so we're going to be flipping it from side to side each time until we get down to the depth. And the bottom of this will actually be angled to match the beam angle, and so that this can slide all the way down to the end. And so it's starting to look like the tool we want it to be. Up here on the top, we need to drill a hole through the square of one and into the square of the other. I'm going to come halfway from one side, turn around, and come halfway from the other. And this will allow the bolt to go through. And it has a carriage head that will fit into the square socket on one of the two sides. So you can see how this carriage head comes in, and then the nut can turn on, and that's what will actually allow it to clamp down onto the surface. A really simple old design, and works really, really well. So for all the final details on it, I'm going to break out some 400 grit sandpaper, and this will give me nice clean scratches on all the surfaces. I want to make sure it comes down to the wood. I ended up leaving the faces of the brass ever so slightly proud of the wood. I kind of liked that little bit of feel, though I know a lot of people are going to want to make it perfectly smooth all the way across. I just kind of, I was going to take the brass down a little bit farther and thought, I kind of like the look of it. And it's a little easier to do. I also want to make sure my scratches on the brass are all running in the same direction so I get that brushed feel. So I'm going to use that on the bench top and then run the block over it so that all of the scratches on the brass are running in the same direction. And at this point, it's just detailing, and you can do this forever. The detailing steps are one of those things that are never done. And at a certain point, you have to say, this is good enough. And we can move on to the homemade boiled linseed oil. Ooh la la. I love how that walnut comes out. Just dip the whole thing in, let it soak in as much as it wants, wipe it off, and I'm going to just let the wood soak up as much as it wants until it's fully soaked off, wipe off the excess, and apply paste wax. And then it's put it together. Slide the beam in, turn the nut down, and your bevel gauge is done. It's one of those things that's a really rather quick, simple project, and it's a lot of fun. You can never have enough of these in your shop. It's a project that you could do over and over again, and each time get a little bit better at it. And it's a relatively affordable kit, so you could do it as many times as you want, make them Christmas gifts, and hand them out. Lots of fun. So there you have it, a bevel gauge. This is one of those tools that you can never have enough of. I have probably 15 of them in the shop, and I've had projects where they've all been used and set up. And basically, it's a square that you can set to any angle. And so anytime you're doing a compound angle, you have a square with one, and then you have a bevel with the other. Or if you have a double compound, you have two of bevels that are at different angles. Or if you have a triple compound, you have three bevels at different angles, so they're all measuring different things. And you can have a lot of fun with these. They're just a really useful tool that I use all the time, and it's nice to have a few more of them. Now this is actually made from a kit from Tay Tools. I'll leave a link to that down below. It's just a nice simple kit with the pieces you need to make a really nice efficient bevel gauge. And voila! This is really nice. I like this thing, and I might have to make a couple more because, well, you can never have enough bevel gauges. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What things would you do differently? What are some suggestions, ideas, comments on this? Let me know those down below. That does help out the channel, so thank you for that. Anytime you hit comment down below or you hit like, share, subscribe, those things do help us, and they get us in front of more people, and they help the channel to grow. So thank you. That means more than I can say. Also, if you want to take it one step farther, there are a bunch of people who are scrolling over here on the side. They are the patrons on Patreon. They're the ones who are literally keeping us going. We are completely sponsored by you, the viewers, and through Patreon and clicking the little join button down below and become a member here on YouTube, you can help us out and keep us going. We do have special perks for both, and that really does mean a lot, so thank you. If you'd like to find out more about Patreon and what we offer, there are links down below, or you can click the little join button and become a member here on YouTube. I think that'll do it for now. And until next time, have a wonderful day. There's a difference between a bevel gauge and a level gauge. A bevel gauge finds angles. A level gauge isn't a tool.